I started my social media work at Mayo Clinic around 2005. Around 2010, we created what became the Mayo Clinic social media network. I had been in that role for about a dozen years, and I was kind of thinking, what do I want to do now? But I had a fateful coffee with a high school classmate of mine, Dr. Dave Strobel, where he told me about a clinic that he was working with that was operated by the Pipe Trades Union. And it just got me to thinking, instead of just communicating about healthcare, maybe I could get involved in an effort to make it better, at least the primary care part of it, and to provide it in a different way. Hi, Lee Aase from HELPcare LLC. I'm the founder of HELPcare LLC and glad to welcome you to our new podcast called Take Charge. At HELPcare, our passion is helping people to take charge of their health and their health care, and for those who are medical professionals, to help you take charge of your healthcare career. So that's why we call the podcast Take Charge, and I'm really pleased to introduce my co-host for this adventure, Dan Hinmon. Dan's been a good friend for about 15 years, and I'm glad to welcome you to be part of this, Dan.
Hey, thanks, Anthony. It's really great to be on the podcast with you today. You're right. And we worked together so well previously, and now I'm really excited to be able to work together on this Take Charge podcast. I really believe in the mission of this organization, helping people take charge of their health, and also helping providers, physicians, PAs, medical assistants to find a great place to provide care for patients. So thanks for inviting me to be part of this.
Glad to have you on board.
So, Lee, I thought what would be really interesting in this podcast would be to get to know you just a little bit better. And so let's just kind of start out and say, tell us a little bit about yourself, your childhood, high school, college, marriage, family, and anything you want to share.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Austin, Minnesota, which is the home of Hormel, where they turn about 18,000 pigs a day into Spam and other delicious treats. As a high school senior, I was a member of the state runner-up basketball team. I went off to school, and within about 3 weeks of starting college, I met my now wife of 40 years, Lisa. So that actually kind of was the end of my basketball career for practical purposes. When I was at school, I got kind of interested in politics. I heard Dr. Francis Schaeffer, who is a Christian theologian, and he spoke at Bethel College in St. Paul, Minnesota, and he just talked about why it's important for people of faith, Christians, to get involved in politics and government and really be salt and light, in society. And so I decided to go to my precinct caucuses and ended up running for state representative when I was 21 and changed my major from chemistry and pre-med to political science. And that led to about a 14-year career in politics and government. I worked at the state legislature. I managed a congressional campaign for a congressman. And then around late 1999, I was talking with a friend who I'd met through my state legislative work, and she said, over at Mayo Clinic, that communications group over there, they have a lot of fun. And I thought, I'd really like to kind of stay here in my hometown where I'm working, and I should maybe check out some other options. And got the recommendation that I should apply at Mayo Clinic, and fortunately I was hired to be part of their media relations team. And so I worked there for about 3 years in that role and got an opportunity to become the manager of the media relations team. And then at that point, a little bit after that, I heard about this thing called podcasting. And this was just when podcasting was invented. And I said, well, that sounds really interesting. And we were producing these second radio segments called Mayo Clinic Medical Edge for radio stations, distributed to about 100 radio stations around the country. And I said, well, a podcast, that's just an audio file connected to an RSS feed. And at this time, this was about a year after podcasting had been invented. And Apple came out with its iTunes podcast directory. And I said, well, let's just do this. So we took the Mayo Clinic logo, these are segments that had already been approved, and I used what I like to call the proceed until apprehended model of innovation. We just created a podcast. And it was about probably 6-8 weeks later that I got a call from someone in the technology commercialization group at Mayo who said, "We got a call from a pharma company that wants to advertise in our podcast. Do we have a podcast?" And so I kind of had to backtrack a little bit. Well, yeah, we've been doing this with the radio segments. Anyway, I went and looked at our server logs, and it turned out that our downloads had gone from 900 a month in the month, because these were on the Mayo Clinic website already, from 900 a month to about 74,000 in the space of just a few weeks. And then I went and looked at the podcast directory, and here, much to my surprise, our podcast had been featured on the front page. And so it was featured and it was kind of a being at the right place at the right time with a big brand. And that just enabled us to get some traction internally at Mayo Clinic to say, well, my job had been dealing with the big media, New York Times, the national networks, the regional and local newspapers and media. And clearly that was the place where you're going to have the biggest impact. But it enabled us to make the case that, maybe there's something to this new media thing. And so that gave us a chance to start exploring that as well. And that led to kind of a second career while at Mayo Clinic.
Great. So college, politics, Mayo Clinic is kind of your path that way. And so you explained why the podcast became so popular right away. Just kind of a really lucky, fortunate thing that it appeared on the homepage of the podcast directory. How did you build it from there? How did you know what content to include in that podcast?
Well, so it never became a very good podcast. I mean, because it was 60 seconds long. And I used to say, it's kind of the hypochondriac feed. Because, for people who eventually end up becoming passionate subscribers to this podcast, it's going to be people who are interested in taking charge of their health, and also, medical professionals who are interested in maybe a career change or looking to do healthcare in a different way. And so it's very much aligned. Well, we had cancer segments and heart disease segments and men's health and women's health, and it was designed for a mass audience, where podcasting is much more for people with an in-depth interest in a particular issue. And, it was 60 seconds long. And so by the time you downloaded it, it was done. So it was kind of like, kind of like I said.
It was more like a commercial, more than a podcast, really.
Right. Yeah. So it was, but what it enabled us to do was take a step back and say, okay, there's something to this. It's worth us devoting some time to think about what we want to do, and so I guess, what do we want to do with new media? I mean, it's not the same massive impact that you saw back then with the traditional media. We're also producing TV segments that were 90 seconds long. But in order to produce those 90-second TV segments, we were interviewing subject matter experts for 15, 20, 25 minutes. So one thing we did was put a microphone on the interviewer as well as on the subject expert, and then stripped out the audio. And we were able to actually then turn that into a 15, 20-minute in-depth segment on that particular topic, which was, much more satisfying kind of approach. There was, back in the day, it was kind of a big thing to have a flip video camera. So this was before the iPhone, but you could, instead of having a Sony camera that you had to, take a firewire cable into your computer and play the whole tape through to digitize, the flip camera had a USB port that just flipped up, and you could upload it directly, put it on your computer and be editing it right away. And so one of the things we did was send one of those cameras with all of the members of my media relations team, so that when they were interviewing a subject matter expert for a news release, might as well shoot some video while they're doing it. And that led us to being able to upload some YouTube videos that were more in depth and related to the news releases, and kind of gave some more color to it to generate some more news media opportunities too. Shot some video, patient stories where, previously you had to have a $25,000 camera and another person to be able to shoot that kind of stuff. And we just kind of enabled our staff to be guerrilla producers to capture some of that footage that could then be used in some of these social platforms. At the same time, Facebook had just become more popular and had opened up to non-college students. And I had kids at the time who were college student age, or, just getting into college. And I saw, I mean, one of the things I'd learned through my experience in orientation at Mayo Clinic was that word of mouth was the most important factor in people's preference for Mayo. And so I thought, wow, these social platforms are just that's the new way this word of mouth is going to happen is online. This time I didn't proceed until after we ended. I actually asked the department chair, is it okay if we create a Facebook page? But then as the whole social media, new media kind of environment started to grow, got into Twitter, got into LinkedIn. And because I was at Mayo Clinic, which is one of the more respected hospitals in the country, number one on the U.S. News and World Report, best hospitals for many years now, that actually got us some notoriety within the healthcare professional world that we were this established organization using some of these new tools. And that opened opportunities for us to, I guess, exert some leadership or, to help others who are interested in also using these tools who maybe didn't have, this kind of the same platform as we naturally did at Mayo Clinic.
So you're very entrepreneurial in these approaches, it feels like. Getting ideas, trying to initiate and start them within the organization. How did Mayo Clinic leadership respond to your initiatives, generally, would you say?
It was kind of interesting because kind of simultaneously, we had 3 sets of conjoined twins separated within about a year at Mayo Clinic. And the first one of those got an awful lot of media attention. And through that, I got to be good friends with a couple of reporters from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. And I was talking with them about Twitter and talking about some other things like that. And then one day, I got a call from one of them saying, "Hey, would you come and talk with us about how we could use Twitter, like at the newspaper?" And a few weeks later, I remember it was Good Friday. I got a direct message tweet from one of them saying, "Hey, we'd like to follow you around one day to, for the work that, talk about the work that you're doing at Mayo Clinic in social media as Mayo Clinic social media guy." And I thought, okay, wow. Well, we got to come up with something interesting because we weren't doing that much. So it was that interesting at that point. We were just doing a little bit. And then meanwhile, this is sort of this confluence of some crazy events. It was that very weekend that Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit did the first Twitter surgery. So this was, they were tweeting from the OR. So they weren't using Twitter to operate, but it was kind of a voyeuristic kind of thing. And CNN did a story about it. So then on the Monday, Roger Sergel from ABC News called, they had to do a story about social media and healthcare. But meanwhile, back to the story with the Star-Tribune, I said, okay, what can I do that would be interesting? So I know we could create a Twitter boot camp and we could call it Tweet Camp. And we'll do a 1-hour session where I'll provide training to people on how to use Twitter. And so we scheduled that Tweet Camp for the following Wednesday. And so then when ABC News called called my colleague and said, "Are you guys doing anything?" She called me and I said, well, they could come to Tweet Camp. And so we had both the Minneapolis Star-Tribune and ABC News. And I think I got on World News Tonight. As part of this as well. And this is just a long way of saying, you asked how did Mayo respond to this? At first, I thought I might kind of be in trouble because, here I'm out front on that. They actually really appreciated it. They thought it was great. They like to have Mayo Clinic be a leader, in this. And so in some ways, having this external coverage brought me internal credibility. Because if other people are recognizing the work that you're doing, then suddenly it becomes, hey, there's really something to this. And yeah, it's kind of cool that Mayo's a leader in this, but the way it happens is you got to try stuff. You have to be willing to experiment. And like when I experimented with the podcast, it was a risk, but it was a very calculated risk because these 60-second segments were already approved. They were already edited for use in traditional media. It was just using that in a new way and not any real expense in doing it. But by bootstrapping some of these things, it gave us an opportunity to get some wins that then enabled us to get some more resources to be able to do a better job with it.
I'm wondering if your time in politics contributed to any of your attitudes or successes at Mayo Clinic.
I think it really did, because when you're working in a political campaign, it's the ultimate entrepreneurial kind of enterprise. You have to get 50% plus one market share, and you don't have unlimited resources. And at least back then, I mean, the money today is, immense and totally crazy. So this was back in the 90s, when I was doing this. And I mean, the internet was just there were a couple of campaigns where we did a little bit of internet stuff, but it was, I mean, you think of, 94, 96, 98. And I was working in the congressional office, not the campaign, but even before that, when I was in the pre-internet days, when I was doing political campaigns, you have to be super resourceful. You have to stretch the resources as far as you can and get as many uses out of things as you can. And so I think, it probably also gave me, what I like to talk about is just like the MacGyver mindset. Think like MacGyver. Look at what resources you have around that you could use, that you could apply in a particular situation to try to accomplish things. And so thinking like MacGyver, I think, was something that probably came out of and actually it's that, and also just my dad. My dad would just always know how to fix things. He'd figure out how to, like, he was MacGyver before MacGyver was MacGyver. Didn't blow up but he, always sort of knew how to hack things together.
I noticed when we worked together that technology never intimidated you. It was like, "Oh, here's a fun new tool. Let's do this." You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I kind of think that, when I was a junior in high school, we got an Apple II Plus computer in our computer lab, and so I got to get some practice with programming that. And so, it was kind of, I also think, I was born in 1963, so I was kind of right in the end of the baby boom. And so I'm kind of right in between, and it put me in a good position to be a translator to the older folks, but still not afraid of the technology, because I didn't grow up with it like the digital natives now, but I spent a lot of time in basic, computing, like the language BASIC.
Another thing that you said a little bit ago that I think has been true to my experience with you is to just do stuff. Right?
Mhm.
So other people, we might be intimidated about, oh, how do I tweet? How do I do a podcast? How do I? What was your attitude as you approach those new things?
Yeah, I was just always very curious, and I've been very interested in technology. And I mean, technology makes it possible to, like, I think it was Archimedes, give me a lever and I can move the world. So that's technology. Give me a lever and a place to stand, and long enough lever, and I can move the world. And so I think it's just really fascinating to see the cool things that you can do with technology, and not technology for its own sake, but looking at how it can be used to accomplish the goals that you have. And that's kind of how I got started with Facebook, is that I recognized, once I really saw what Facebook was, and I recognized that this is just the new way that word of mouth can happen. So I think I think that has been very much my mindset, and nothing happens until people try stuff. Nothing changes. You got to change to change. You got to be willing to try something new. And so I think that's, I guess some gift that I've had is to be able to see some of those possibilities.
So then, speaking of changes, a few
Mhm.
years ago, you decided it was time for something else.
Yeah, I had been, I started my social media work at Mayo Clinic around 2005. Around 2010, we created what became the Mayo Clinic Social Media Network. We'll talk about that in a future episode. But I had been in that role for about a dozen years, and I was kind of thinking, what do I want to do now? Because I ended up inventing a job at Mayo Clinic that was kind of my dream job. And at Mayo, there's I guess a practice, a tradition that people rotate in their offices. Like the CEO is there for 8 or 9 years, department chairs are, 8 years or so in a given role. And I was in my mid to, 57, 58, and I'm thinking, okay, so what do I want to do? I didn't want to be the 67-year-old social media guy at Mayo Clinic. And I also kind of didn't think it was realistic for me to stay in that role. And there really wasn't another role there that I was super interested in doing. But I had a fateful coffee with a high school classmate of mine, Dr. Dave Strobel, where he told me about a clinic that he was working with that was operated by the Pipe Trades Union. And it just got me to thinking, instead of just communicating about healthcare, maybe I could get involved in an effort to make it better, at least the primary care part of it, and to provide it in a different way. And again, we'll get into that in another episode, and we'll kind of tell more of that story. But I think some of the same principles of resourcefulness and experimentation and just starting things and recognizing that you're not going to get it right away. You don't have to have everything figured out before you start. The late Zig Ziglar used to say, if you wait till all the lights are on green before you leave the house, you'll never get out of the garage. So recognizing you need to make some adjustments along the way, but if you head in a general good direction and you have some momentum, the other analogy I use is that if your car's stuck by the side of the road, once you push it and you get it moving a little bit, then it's way easier to change direction. But when it's at a dead stop, you just can't, there's no movement possible. But once you get some momentum, once you get rolling, then it becomes easier and easier to make those mid-course adjustments. And thankfully, over time in my work at Mayo Clinic, we got some momentum going and we're able to do some interesting things. And thankfully, also now at HELPcare and HELPcare Clinic, we're also getting some momentum here as well. And it's been exciting to see that develop.
So I wonder, as you look back on these three, what are kind of very different careers in a way, politics, then with Mayo in a large corporation, and now startup, entrepreneurial, having some really good successes in a few years. What core values have driven you through this process?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say that's most important to me is my faith. We believe that in the principle of vocation. So I'm a Presbyterian. As Presbyterians, we believe in God's providence and in His calling, and that just along with the Protestant Reformation, there's really a sense that it isn't just the preachers, it isn't just the evangelists, everybody has a calling, and fulfilling your calling is your way of loving and serving your neighbor. And that's, the great commandment is to love God with all your heart. And then the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And so, to be able to try to be as helpful as possible, to do good to as many people as you can. I think that as I look at my Mayo experience, there was a lot of expertise that was locked behind the walls. And to be able to, it was a way that we could take a flip video camera and make this expertise available to educate people on very, esoteric topics that they maybe wouldn't have a chance to talk to a specialist about. But to be able to hear that specialist, talk in some depth about an issue that was concerned to them was really a neat thing to be able to do. So I think that would be the foundational value, is just like try to be faithful, be a good steward of the resources that you have. I've been blessed that, having worked at Mayo, I was able to take early retirement and be able to use that as a way to then start this new thing and help my high school classmate start a new direct primary care clinic.
That's the journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a startup, in a new organization.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because, it'll be much later when this gets published, but as we're recording this today, tomorrow we're publishing a blog post. That's our third birthday for HELPcare Clinic. The first patient was seen on February 4th, 2022. And so it's been 3 years since we got started. And while we've learned a lot along the way, and it's been just neat to see how the momentum is built.
Well, Lee, thank you so much today for taking us on this journey. It's really great to learn about your history. And as we move forward with this podcast, we'll be sharing a lot of other great information for people, not only about you, but the organization, some of the key players, but also the philosophy of healthcare and the way people really can improve their lives through doing the right things.
Well, thanks, Dan. I'm really so glad to have you be part of this as well. As I mentioned earlier, we've been friends for 15 plus years, and
Yep.
and colleagues and working together. And we'll talk about that next time. Talk about some more of that history working together. But it's been, doing good things with good friends is really what it's all about, and it's been just a joy. So I'm looking forward to us being able to continue this journey together.
Same for me. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining Take Charge with HELPcare. If you liked this episode, I hope you'll subscribe and give us a 5-star review, and be sure to share with your friends as well.